The land of Sanctuary was once a place of peace and prosperity, where the people lived in harmony with one another and the natural world. But all that changed when the Lord of Terror, Diablo, rose from the depths of hell and unleashed his wrath upon the world. Now, darkness and fear have gripped the land, and the people live in constant terror of the demons that roam the countryside. In this world of horror and despair, only a few brave heroes stand between the innocent and the forces of evil. Among these heroes are a barbarian warrior and a powerful sorceress, who have joined forces to face the coming storm. Together, they must gather allies and prepare for battle against the Lord of Terror, knowing that their chances of survival are slim. But they are determined to do whatever it takes to protect their world and the people they love, even if it means sacrificing everything they hold dear. The darkness was suffocating. The barbarian warrior, Korgath, and the sorceress, Lyra, pressed on through the depths of the catacombs beneath the ruined city. They had been sent on a mission to retrieve an ancient artifact, but they had no idea what they were truly getting themselves into. As they moved deeper into the catacombs, the air grew thicker and the shadows grew longer. Strange noises echoed through the tunnels, and the faint scent of death permeated the air. Korgath and Lyra had fought many battles together, but this was different. This was a battle against something far more sinister than any demon or monster they had faced before. "Lyra, do you feel that?" Korgath said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Lyra replied, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "It's as if the air itself is alive with malevolent energy." Korgath gripped his weapon tightly, his senses on high alert. Suddenly, a guttural growl echoed through the catacombs, sending chills down the warrior's spine. Lyra summoned a ball of light, illuminating the tunnel ahead of them. What they saw was beyond their worst nightmares. A horde of twisted, mutated beasts was charging towards them, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The creatures were unlike anything Korgath and Lyra had ever seen, with razor-sharp claws, gaping jaws filled with razor-sharp teeth, and skin that seemed to pulse with a sickly green energy. Without hesitation, Korgath charged towards the creatures, his weapon cleaving through the air with deadly precision. Lyra summoned bolts of lightning, striking the beasts with a fierce intensity. The battle was brutal and bloody, and the air was filled with the stench of death. Despite their valiant efforts, Korgath and Lyra were outnumbered and outmatched. The beasts were relentless, and their attacks were becoming increasingly frenzied. Korgath was knocked to the ground, his weapon slipping from his grasp. Lyra was surrounded, her spells barely keeping the creatures at bay. As they fought for their lives, Korgath and Lyra realized that they were not alone in the catacombs. Something was watching them, something far more powerful than the beasts they were facing. And then, suddenly, everything went dark. Korgath and Lyra were plunged into a void of absolute darkness. They could hear the creatures snarling and growling in the distance, but they could see nothing. Lyra summoned a ball of light, but it was snuffed out as soon as it appeared. Korgath's heart pounded in his chest, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. "Lyra, we need to get out of here," Korgath said, his voice shaking with fear. "I know," Lyra replied, her own voice sounding small and vulnerable in the darkness. "But how? We can't see anything." And then, a voice whispered in Korgath's ear, a voice that sent shivers down his spine. "Welcome to my domain," the voice hissed. "I've been expecting you." Korgath and Lyra spun around, their weapons at the ready. But they still saw nothing. "Who are you?" Korgath demanded, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and fear. "I am the Lord of Terror," the voice replied, its words echoing through the darkness. "And you, my friends, are about to meet your end." Suddenly, the darkness was replaced by blinding light. Korgath and Lyra shielded their eyes, trying to adjust to the sudden change. When they opened their eyes, the sorceress's eyes widened in fear as she realized what was happening. She knew that this was not the end, but only the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt them forever. The two heroes stood in stunned silence as they watched the demon rip through the sky, its roar echoing through the darkness. They knew that the Lord of Terror had returned, and they were not prepared for what was to come. The sorceress turned to the barbarian, her voice shaking with fear. "We have to warn the others," she said. "We have to tell them that Diablo has returned." The barbarian nodded in agreement, his face grim. "We must prepare for battle," he said. "We must gather our strength and our allies if we are to stand a chance against the Lord of Terror." The two heroes set out on their mission, determined to warn the others and gather their allies for the coming battle. But as they traveled through the dark and twisted lands of Sanctuary, they knew that they were being watched. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision, and they heard whispers on the wind that chilled them to the bone. They knew that Diablo's minions were lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. As they journeyed deeper into the darkness, they encountered twisted creatures that defied description. Some were mere beasts, while others were twisted mockeries of humanity, their bodies distorted and malformed by the corrupting power of Diablo. The sorceress shuddered as they encountered a group of mutilated corpses that had been twisted and fused together into a grotesque abomination. She knew that this was the work of Diablo's minions, and that they were growing bolder by the day. But despite the horrors that they encountered, the two heroes remained steadfast in their mission. They knew that they had to warn the others, and that they had to gather their strength for the coming battle. Finally, after days of traveling through the dark and twisted lands, they arrived at the gates of a small town. The town was quiet and peaceful, but the two heroes knew that it was only a matter of time before the darkness descended upon them. They made their way to the town's central square, where they found a group of frightened villagers huddled together. The sorceress stepped forward, her voice ringing out across the square. "Diablo has returned," she said. "He has risen from the depths of hell, and he is coming for us all." The villagers stared at her in disbelief, but the barbarian stepped forward, his massive frame towering over them. "We have faced this demon before," he said, "and we will face him again, but we cannot do it alone. We need your help." Slowly, the villagers began to stir. They knew that the two heroes spoke the truth, and they knew that they had to band together if they were to survive. Over the next few days, the heroes trained the villagers, teaching them how to defend themselves against the horrors that awaited them. They gathered weapons and supplies, and they prepared for the coming battle. And then, one night, it happened. The skies turned blood red, and the ground shook beneath their feet. The Lord of Terror had arrived. The two heroes rallied the villagers, leading them into battle against the minions of Diablo. They fought fiercely, but they knew that it was only a matter of time before the Lord of Terror himself arrived. And then, with a deafening roar, Diablo appeared. He towered over them, his massive form wreathed in flames. The heroes and the villagers stood their ground, determined to fight to the death if they had to. The battle raged on for hours, with neither side gaining the upper hand. The heroes fought with all their might, their bodies weary and battered. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the sorceress summoned a powerful spell that stunned Diablo, giving the heroes the opening they needed to strike the final blow. With a deafening roar, Diablo fell, his body crumbling to ash. The heroes and the villagers cheered, but their joy was short-lived, for they knew that the darkness would always be lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again. As they watched the ashes of Diablo disappear into the wind, the sorceress turned to the barbarian. "We must always be ready," she said, "for the darkness never truly dies." The barbarian nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "We will be ready," he said, "for we are the defenders of Sanctuary, and we will always stand against the forces of darkness." The battle raged on for what felt like an eternity, with the heroes and the villagers fighting with every ounce of strength they had. But despite their determination, they were no match for the Lord of Terror himself. Diablo's power was too great, and one by one, the heroes and the villagers fell before him. The sorceress, the barbarian, and even the most skilled fighters among the villagers were no match for the Lord of Terror. But in their dying moments, the heroes and the villagers knew that they had not died in vain. They had fought bravely, and they had given the people of Sanctuary a chance to survive. They knew that others would rise up to take their place, and that eventually they would defeat Diablo once and for all. As the last of the heroes and the villagers fell, Diablo let out a triumphant roar. But he knew that his victory was only temporary. He knew that the people of Sanctuary would rise up against him, and that they would never stop fighting until he was defeated. And so, as the sun rose on the battlefield, Diablo vanished into the shadows, biding his time until he could once again rise up and challenge the people of Sanctuary. But for now, the heroes and the villagers were safe, and they knew that they had the strength and the courage to face whatever horrors the Lord of Terror might throw at them in the future.